Hey everyone, how's it going? Azren the Language Nerd here. As always, welcome to another episode of Ask Azren. This is a series where Jared asks me a variety of questions about language learning, or rather, really one question that we both discuss. That's probably more accurate. And then we go from there. So we're gonna skip the fun fact because I'm on a slightly tighter timeline today. Is that okay?
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
I'm running out of
Yeah.
fun facts anyway, so.
Okay. Sounds good. So what's our topic today, Jared?
Okay, so our topic today is how much should you study per week when learning a language?
Hmm. How much should you study per week?
hmm
Well, I think the most basic way to answer is I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. I think it's not really you should study an hour a week, you should study 20 hours a week, you should study. I think it just depends on how quickly you want to learn. That's probably the most basic way to answer it. I don't think there's a right or wrong.
hmm Maybe to
Yeah,
take
like
it a
how?
step back, even what constitutes studying?
What constitutes studying? I usually think of studying with anything with a lot of strategies that you would use to succeed in school. So when you want to study for a test, you might reread your notes, you might rewrite your notes, you might use some flashcards, you might watch some videos to help you understand something like a concept. So in language, I view it the same way. You might watch like a grammar video, you might do some worksheets, you might make some flashcards, you might review them, might reread your notes, you might do some writing. Like that's what I picture as studying.
hmm So the
Um,
things that you listed there are all active practices.
yeah, I think passive studying can happen too. The same way, like I just wrote an essay for my class at the university, and I
hmm
did some passive research for it. And I would like passively, I would listen to a couple of videos, or yes, listened. It's funny, I listened because I didn't watch them. I just had them playing, and I was doing something else. So I listened
Okay.
to a couple of videos for background information about the essay I was going to write about. I didn't need to
hmm
cite them because I just needed to. I was just curious about certain things.
Sure.
You could do that for language too, like the same way you could but I don't consider that studying. Is that studying? That's not really studying. I don't picture that as studying. You don't study for a test or an essay or something by passively listening, right?
No, not normally. Normally it's more active. It's
Yeah,
reading. Well, reading would be passive.
could be.
Yeah.
Depends on how intently you're reading, right?
Yeah. Hmm. I mean, what about practicing with a tutor? Does that count as studying?
I don't think that's studying. No, I wouldn't count that as studying. That's like taking a class, or that's
hmm
um
But we're talking when we're saying studying, we're talking about trying to improve your language abilities, right?
I
Um,
guess so. I
so
guess so.
if you're practicing with someone, aren't you actively improving your abilities?
Sure, I just view studying as very different than practicing. I don't
Mm,
view them the same way. Like I could,
Okay.
like if I was thinking of like a math class, for example, I could study for a math test. And well, actually, is math the same way? I could study for a math test. I sit down, I do exercises, I reread, I memorize my formulas. I guess but there's not exactly the same. Like studying for the math test would be doing a bunch of practice exercises,
Mhm.
right? Maybe, oops, sorry, my headphones fell out. Maybe math is the wrong analogy, but like it's like a history test. That's probably a better one. If like a history test, I could study and I could study by rereading my notes and memorizing the facts and going through my course material. But then you could actually apply your historical knowledge by discussing the history and trying to analyze the psychology of the person. Like, why did that person make the decision that they did in 1852?
Mhm.
Why? That's a different kind of skill. Or you can go to a class where you have a class discussion about it, or you like it's a little bit different. So I think if the question is how much should you study per week, up to you. I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer per se, but I just think the big thing is you can't only study. You can't study your way to fluency.
Right.
You can't
Yeah.
only study. So study. Some people like to study more. Like I posted something about this on LinkedIn. Or sorry, I did post on LinkedIn, but on Instagram, someone left a comment. I'm actually going to read it right now because it's an interesting comment.
Sure.
So I said, if you only study a language, you'll never become as fluent as you'd like to. You need to also use the language in non-academic contexts. And the caption was, that was like in the picture itself.
hmm
And the caption was, don't only study a language, more studying does not equal more fluency. And then one individual wrote, I could not agree more. For me, studying takes the fun out of language learning. I prefer to live the language. And that was an interesting comment because for me, I don't mind studying. Like I will study the language. I will study, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I just won't only study. And this person read my post and she read it differently. I think it's a she. Yeah, it's a she. She read it differently and she read it as, oh yeah, I don't even like to study. Like don't study. I just like to live the language. So I think there's you
Hmm.
the amount that you study is quite flexible. Could be 10
Right.
minutes a week or it could be 15 hours a week. And both are okay as long as that's not, in my opinion, as long as that's not all you're doing.
But is that the motivation for anyone? Like, is anyone content to just study a language and never do anything more with it?
Well, I think a lot of people think if they study it and they approach it in a very academic way, they
Mm-hmm.
think that that's going to be a pathway to fluency. Or they know somewhere deep down it's not, but it's too scary to do something otherwise.
Hmm. Yeah.
Or they're limited on time, so they don't want to put more time into it than what they have, and so they pick to only study. Like a lot of my students, a lot of Calgary language nerd students, I'd perhaps argue the majority of them are definitely they're trying to learn their language more through study
Mm-hmm.
than they are anything else. Like they, yeah,
But you
I
have to
think.
have an ultimate goal. Like for me personally, when I'm
Mhm.
studying a language, I'm learning, maybe I'm engaging with some grammar exercises or trying to figure out how something works. I'm doing that so that I can use it in a conversation later. Right?
Mhm.
That's the motivation for me. It's not that I'm just going to keep reading these grammar rules forever and keep just studying. I have an ultimate goal. I'm using these so that I can get something else.
Mhm.
So if you're content with just studying, then maybe you don't really want to speak the language.
Yeah, like it's an interesting point. I'm thinking of some people right now. I can even see it in myself in a way, actually, where you're learning a language, but you don't have anything in the foreseeable future where you're going to have to use
Mhm.
the language.
Right. But you
Like
can
you don't.
create those for yourself as well, right?
Yeah, but a lot of people don't pick. I mean, I think that a lot of people don't. They're not going to. How do I say this? Their mentality isn't I'm going to create it for myself. The mentality is I'm going to learn it in case the situation arises where I'm going to need it. So I have a student, for
Hmm.
example, I've worked with for a few years, and her reason for learning is that in her line of work, there might potentially be a chance every now and so it's just an interest of hers.
Okay.
So she kind of likes it. I don't know if she likes it actually. I actually would maybe argue she doesn't.
Mm.
But she's the kind of person where she has to finish what she starts. So she
Okay.
started back in high school, then she kind of let it go, and then she picked it up again, and then she wants to stick it to the end.
Hmm.
So she doesn't really enjoy it based on what I think. I don't think she loves it. It's neutral.
Right.
And she's learning because A, she started, and B, because she might encounter people at work, maybe, where she'll have to use a little bit of French.
Okay.
So, but she's not going to go create a situation where she has to use French or anything like that. Like, I don't think she will. So it's interesting because if you're in that kind of position, like, you may not, what's the word I'm looking for? You may not actively, what's the word? How do I explain this? You might not take it as seriously as someone
Hmm.
who's like, hey, I'm going to move to Mexico probably in the next 5 years because I'm retiring. So I
Hmm.
better learn some Spanish. That's a little bit of a different thing. Like, okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to be living there. I'm going to, right? Or if you've married someone or you're dating someone who speaks, like I'm doing intensive Gujarati lessons with someone right now. Her husband is Gujarati,
Hmm.
and she really wants to be able to talk with his in-laws,
Right.
right? And they do speak English, but she still wants to be able to talk to them in Gujarati, and that's her main. So she can clearly picture how she's going to use it. And I think a lot of language learners don't have a clear picture of how they're going to use it.
So do
They
you think that
never.
your motivation levels affect how much you should study on a weekly basis?
How much your motivation should motivation levels affect how much you study? I don't know if it should or shouldn't, but it probably will.
Or maybe what the breakdown is between studying and practicing, maybe what that ratio would be?
I think that ratio should probably be. I think if how do I say this? Um, if you lean more heavily into using the language to
Mm-hmm.
to complete a task, and your ratio is heavier on that side, I think it's not a bad idea to add in a little bit of study, because you probably have a tendency to make a lot of mistakes that you don't even know that you're making. And you
Right.
might not care, by the way. They might not care, in which case, by all means, you don't have to do any extra studying. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're questioning yourself, like, oh, am I studying enough? If you're like questions in your head, then there's probably something deep down that you unconsciously you're aware you're not doing something right. You just haven't formally articulated it in a way where you can say, this is probably what I'm doing wrong. So my general rule of thumb would be, if you're more leaning heavily into just using the language, living the language, quote unquote, a
Right.
little bit of study is probably beneficial, because otherwise you might end up like my grandma on my dad's side, where she speaks English just fine, as in she can get her point across, and people talk to her, she understands the main point of what you're saying, but her grammar is so bad. And I'm not saying this in a negative way, just because of how she came here. She didn't take formal classes, like just the how it all played out, right? And that her English grammar is really, really poor. And even though you understand what she says, um, if she were younger and she wanted to actually go work somewhere and work in a company or develop professionally in Canada or things of that nature, she'd have a really difficult time, especially when it comes to writing, even speaking, to be honest, though. She'd really have a difficult time. It would be hard for her.
Mm-hmm.
As in, she's senior now, she's 80 years old, it doesn't matter, right? So it's not
Right.
important. But if she were younger, she's 20 and she came like that, she would really, it's a very good idea for her to do to work on it, because just living the language has gotten to a point where she can just kind of get her message across all the time, and that's fine for what she needs nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're heavier on the studying side, you definitely, I want to push you more to quote unquote living the language, right? Where you're talking, it's not just talking to native speakers. I find it's talking to people and trying to accomplish something, get a task done using the target language.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really fast way to improve, where you have to actually accomplish something and get something done, or engage in some activity in the target language, not just use it. It's not just using it.
So like there are all kinds of different motivation levels and interests that different
Mm-hmm.
language learners have, right? Some people are going to be more into the studying, some people more into the practical application of the language. Some people have more motivation or less motivation. But when we ask the question, how much should you study? I guess we're talking about what's the most efficient way to acquire a language, just across the
Right.
board, just generally.
Yep.
Instead of trying to predict where people are at, because it's, there's all kinds, it's a spectrum, right?
Sure.
Let's just say let's say you practice speaking 1 hour a week. What is the equivalent of studying?
Right. So if I share my screen here, so this is something I'm working on right now and have been working on for almost coming up close to a year now. That's like a curriculum a self-study curriculum people can use to learn a language. So I've broken down basically 5 different types of learning activities: passive listening, watching videos. And to be honest, watching videos, it's really more listening practice. It's not necessarily videos. I've just given video activities you can do, but it's just listening practice, really.
Okay.
Speaking/conversation, traditional homework, and then reviewing and revisiting your notes and such.
Right.
So the way I've broken it down is, I've said passive listening is optional, because I find some people think it's useful, some people don't. That's optional. Now, speaking, I just say recommended time, 1 hour a week.
Okay.
I've said listening practice/watching videos, 1 hour a week as a recommended time.
Okay.
And we could break this down quite a bit further, because I don't think, a lot of people think, oh, I'll just watch Netflix. Well, no, it's not just watching Netflix. It's not quite that. There's specific ways that one has to go about practicing listening. It's not just, I'm gonna go listen. No, not really, because that becomes more passive listening if you're just like watching Netflix. Like, it's a little bit different, right? Let's call this active listening, not passive listening. Okay. So an hour a week of active listening with very precise methodologies of how you do it. And then an hour a week of traditional homework. So traditional homework is, I think, what people picture as studying, let's say. Like you're taking a group class, or using a textbook, you're using some apps or websites, or there's a self-study program you're using, flashcards, quizzes, reading or writing practice, grammar videos or exercises. Maybe like reviewing or rewriting your notes could even get into here.
But the
And then
first two
usually
that you mentioned wouldn't
yep,
necessarily constitute what we're talking about as studying.
I don't view those as traditional studying because it's not
Okay.
really, yeah, that's just you're trying to learn the language, learning activities, we can call
Right.
it, right?
Okay.
And then a big revisit and review. So let's actually go back here. So you might review your notes on a weekly basis, for example. That's great. Or daily or whatever you want. That's great.
Mhm.
But I also kind of recommend every where is it? Here we go. Every 8 to 12 weeks, I think doing one big revisit and review of your notes is beneficial. I think it's very, very beneficial. It's a nice little benchmark of your level. Like I just did this recently for Mandarin. I've got this like flashcard deck on my phone of like 300 and some odd words,
Mhm.
and like that I've just added in an uncategorized fashion, and I haven't looked at them in 2 years. And I was like, no, I kind of broke my rule. It wasn't 8 to 12 weeks; it was 2 years later. But I
Mhm.
uh, I just gave myself a pop quiz on those words. I was
Right.
like, I don't know, I haven't looked at these in years. Like, let's just see how I do. And I got 37% on my 357 words or something like that.
Mhm.
That's pretty good, I thought. I was pretty happy with
For
myself.
2 years, I'd say so.
37%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty happy.
So according to that, then what we just looked at, you would recommend about an hour of traditional study, and then
Mhm.
every couple of months doing a full review of your notes, which could take, you know, differing lengths of time depending how many
Sure.
notes you have.
Yep.
But generally, kind of like an hour a week of active study. Um,
That's like a good benchmark. Yeah, it's a good place to start. I mean, more is better. More is
yeah,
better, I'm going to say. Less is also an option. So
sure,
it's a good benchmark to aim for and try and problem solve towards. And I think
right.
some people in a polyglot community might go like, really? Just a few hours a week doesn't sound like a lot. Some people might think that. I
Hmm.
can see someone going like 3 hours a week it's a lot. I mean, it is a lot.
And you're saying, again, 3 hours a week is encompassing your
Right,
speaking
right.
practice and the
Studying,
listening.
speak.
Hmm.
Yeah. You
Right.
got it. Yeah. Like someone might go, that's not really that much. Like I could see both sides. I can see someone going, that's a lot. Like, whoa, 3 hours a week. I could also see someone going, that's not really that much. But
Hmm.
based on my experience with the average language learner, not someone in like a polyglot community, the average language learner they're gonna have a hard time with 3 hours a week. They're not gonna be diligent. That's not gonna happen. Some people, yes, of course, but that's a good benchmark to aim for. And can you hit that, like hour of studying and such? Can you hit that benchmark? If you can, then great. Maybe we can increase it, or maybe we just
Sure.
keep it consistent. Or got to find the benchmark that you can actually hit
Hmm.
to build some consistency. I think it's important. So, okay, let's do the lightning round because I have 3 minutes and I have to go.
Okay. So I have 10 questions for you,
Go for it.
and I will ask them as fast as I can, and you will answer them as fast as you can.
Yes,
And, we'll see how it goes. Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Question number one. Do other members of your family have an interest in languages?
No, not really.
How many languages could you study at one time? Let's just say could one study at one time? Like could anybody
Uh,
realistically?
oh, uh, oh, there's so many caveats. That's like a whole discussion. Three.
Three.
Fine.
Okay.
I'm just gonna let's pick a number.
Rapid fire.
Let's talk about that next week, though. Let's talk about that. That's an interesting question. That's a whole discussion. I like that.
Sure. If you have children, will you teach them all of your languages?
No.
Would you recommend language immersion schools for kids?
Yes.
How long should your language tutoring sessions be?
Uh, 30 to 90 minutes.
Do you ever accidentally mix up your languages while you're speaking?
Not very much anymore. I used to.
Do you ever take breaks from language learning?
Yep.
Do you have a favorite language related YouTuber?
Not really.
Okay. If you could live in any other country, which country would you choose?
Mm, oh, good question. That's a good one. I've been to a lot of good countries. I'm gonna pick some cities. I don't know countries, but I'll pick some cities I've liked. Taipei was really cool. I have a soft, yeah. Taipei was really nice. This tiny village where I lived in France, Lons le Gaulois, like a
Okay.
hamlet. That would be, I could picture that. It's a completely different lifestyle. It's village life, and I'd be like it'd be different, but I could picture that. Yeah, those are two options. Lanlegulwa and Taipei I enjoyed both experiences.
When was the Calgary Language Nerds founded?
End of 2016 or very beginning of 17, depends on how you look at it. I started content end of 2016, and I was tutoring a little bit, but didn't really start properly until 2017, let's say.
Okay, that's it. That's all I got.
Cool. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. Jared, thanks for your time as always.
Absolutely.
See you guys later.
See ya.